oftentimes people talk about how you ought to act when nobody is watching, or the importance in recognizing how you act when no one's watching. And I don't think it's necessarily always important to always live your life in reference to other people's perspectives when you're also watching yourself. I think we have to realize that there is a perspective that we have of ourselves. And until we give that perspective the light of day to actually be seen, then we're always going to be living in the shadows cast by our identity. And when I say that, I really just mean that you need to make sure that you are acting in a befitting way of yourself in a way. I think in my own experience, I've always felt like I've been watching myself. And, at times where I might have taken actions that taken away from who I am, whether that be in perspective or in action. There's always a subject to that encounter, subject to that relationship, and it's always going to be you. And to say you're always watching yourself isn't really to say that you have an over analytic eye of yourself, or you need to stretch yourself out in how you look at yourself, or you need to focus so much on who you are. But to say that sometimes I think sometimes we think we get away with certain things when it comes to ourselves, whether that be in what we consume and what we give out, without recognizing that we're watching the entire time. We want to be a certain way and we want to conduct ourselves a certain way. And sometimes we have actions that are unbefitting, but sometimes people aren't watching unbefitting action. And in that way, we try to give ourselves grace and freedom from those actions just because other people aren't watching. And I think it's important, sort of for yourself, not even in reference to other people and not even reference to like this whole grand sense of good, but just in a sense of your subconscious mind and what you believe yourself to be. I think sometimes we tell ourselves certain things in a performative way. Like we want to be perceived as this, so we do this, that, and the other. And then when we get on our own, we don't do the same. And we wonder why the change isn't consistent. We wonder why we don't feel much different. And that's where I think some of the imposter syndrome and stuff sort of sets in. When we don't actually align ourselves with the actions that we wish to portray, or the perspective of ourselves that we wish to have. I've recognized recently that it's really about listening to yourself, truly listening to yourself, and not disregarding what you listen to sometimes. I think there's always a part of ourselves which aims to sort of do the right thing, do the higher thing, do the more aligned thing. And sometimes our feelings betray us. Not in the sense that like they're not our feelings, not in the sense that they're overtly harming us, but in a sense sometimes we get so habitual, so familiar to our circumstances and comforts that we indulge in them too much, that we overindulge in things that are representative of the past to the extent of jeopardizing our future by recreating the past within it. I think the aim of being present isn't just to move forward from the past, it's to be present. It's to recognize that what you build today is what you build today. And in saying that you're always watching you, it's about using your presence, using your watching to your advantage. Recognizing that each day can be an opportunity for you to sort of find new things to love, new things to enjoy. I think it's important to acknowledge that everything is a sign of the world's affection in a way. And when I say that, I mean that a lot of us wait for certain signs to feel good about ourselves. We wait for certain circumstances and things to line up without actually aligning ourselves to circumstance. And when I say aligning ourselves to circumstance, I don't necessarily mean conducting a million different actions here, and there, but aligning how you feel at the very least to what you want. And sometimes that aligning how you feel isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to put myself in the place of myself 10 years down my career. But sometimes it's just putting yourself in a place of happiness, giving yourself enough where you are to be happy where you are, and recognize that no matter what, if you don't give happiness to yourself, then your goal is not going to really bring you anything but a temporary relief, a temporary sigh before you go and try to get your other things. I think I mentioned it in a previous video, but a lot of us have already done things that we promised ourselves we would be happy for, but we never really set a limit or determiner on how long that happiness is supposed to last. And the reason I feel like we never really establish that, or we never really do that for ourselves, is because subtly we're aware that there's going to be something in the future that we want. As long as we'll always lack as long as we have something more to gain. And I think we have to give ourselves some sort of validation to sort of take ourselves away from this lack and gain in reference to our happiness and possibility. If we allow ourselves to be happy in reference to who we are, in reference to our character, in reference to the way that we look at the world, then it won't matter what happens within the world in a way, in a subtle sense, especially when it comes to our own melodrama, our own intricate complexities, and how we interact with this person, how we interact with this event, this circumstance, how this person reacted to this, how the world reacted to this, how this went today. And allow ourselves to sort of be beyond it in a way. Not in the sense of, oh, I'm better than this, or I'm so much above it. But in the sense of recognizing that you don't have to determine who you are and how you feel about yourself on outside events. Not saying that sometimes they can't help us with honesty with ourselves. Not saying that other people's perspectives are always wrong. I don't mean that at all. I mean that to say that everyone has a perspective, including yourself. And until we give ourselves the actual eyes or the actual audience, we'll never really stop performing. And then we'll constantly try to tweak our character and expression and our acting in this certain way without recognizing that we have to change the actor. We have to, in a way, stop acting and truly be ourselves so we can determine what it is that we actually need to change. I think sometimes we bury who we actually are so much so within our ego, within our identification with ourselves, that we become more vulnerable to the world around us because we allow who we are to be based on so many external things. Then when external things don't necessarily go our way, we find ourselves at odds with who we are. And I think there's no importance in doing that. There's nothing to gain from truly doing that. Of course, there's the satisfaction of, oh, I won this award, I can cheer. Oh, I won this reaction from somebody, I can cheer. But I don't know. I think maybe it's just me personally, but I don't necessarily like the idea of constantly being based on other people. I feel like if we always live in reference to everything around us, we'll never be the real subject to our own life. It's always about what we bring to me. It's about what we bring into a situation. Like whenever I'm going into something new or recently, like whenever I'm doing anything, I am trying to make the intention of bringing happiness into it, bringing myself into it enough to be happy within it. And as long as it contributes to me, I have an easy reason to be happy. It's contributing to me. I'm doing this for me. And it's sort of an act of self-love within my own discipline. And if we give that to ourselves, then it doesn't really become about what the discipline brings or coming to the end of whatever it is you're doing. Because sometimes the work gets in front of the title or the outcome that you see. And that's why I think we have to give ourselves validation while working, validation while being. So it doesn't really matter about the outcome. It matters about what we want. And then it's just about us doing it. And not us doing it in dread or effort, but us doing it in our willingness to listen to ourselves and listen to our own affections. And when I say our own affections, I really mean us recognizing that we do actually care for ourselves and our perspective. And if we didn't, then we wouldn't really pay attention to much else. We wouldn't really care for whatever anyone else had to say. We wouldn't really care about anything. It's because we care about ourselves that we worry about other people's perspectives, because we want to be perceived in a certain way so we can feel a certain way about us. And it's always going to be rooted in how we feel and how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about the world around us. So until we give ourselves a proper presence in order to be where we are, in order to be who we are where we are, then we're constantly going to think that it's something waiting for us. And I was writing about it yesterday about how the present isn't something that starts. It never begins. And it's not somewhere you go. It's somewhere you are. You know, I think a lot of us are trying to get to this answer, trying to get to an end without recognizing that the moment really has no end. The answer is ever present and it's always being given. It's not one solid thing. And I think, as abstract as that sounds, I really just mean that we need to be present in order to learn, in order to listen. You know, if we only listen to our own intelligence, our own knowledge, then it's just going to compound upon itself. We might have some new discoveries, new realizations here and there. But when it comes to the actual content of the world and us experiencing who we are, we won't really learn much. We might learn and think about a way that we want to be. But will we actually be that way? I feel like sometimes the learning is the implementation. Sometimes the learning is actually going out there and doing it, not necessarily knowing what you're doing. You know, I think a lot of us are writing our stories without ourselves in mind, or not in the way that I feel like we should. You know, we write ourselves in a sense of, you know, giving ourselves certain things in the future, but never really giving them to ourselves now. And I think it's about what you give to yourself now, because you are watching now. You're not really watching yourself in the future in a sense. You're always watching yourself in the present. And until we actually align our actions and what we want for ourselves with what we do, then we're always going to feel at odds with what is in a way. And I don't know, maybe this is just my experience, maybe it isn't. But recently I've been feeling like, there's so much choice and option out there. We can choose what we do, we can choose how we want to feel about this. And sometimes the choice is a choice that you don't necessarily always want to make. Some choices are easier than others. And when I say a choice that we don't necessarily want to make, I mean, sometimes it's easy to shift your perspective, and sometimes it isn't. But you're always the person who has to do it. And I think the greater amount of self-love we give to ourselves, the more easy those choices become. Because it won't be about, oh, I'm changing my perspective so this can happen. I'm changing my perspective so I can change how I feel right now. And in recognizing how it is always about how you feel now, you sort of open a lot of doors to your own manifestation, accumulation of whatever it is you truly desire, because it is about right now. It's about what you're giving off and what you're giving to the world right now that you truly experience. And if we can recognize it, if we have one bad event in the beginning of our day, it can paint our whole day. Imagine what would happen if we change our perspective in the beginning to something good and allowed ourselves to live it. If we can recognize that our feelings carry over into the next moment, then the importance wouldn't be in the next moment. It would always be in right now. It would always be in recognizing that we have to give ourselves a presence enough to actually interact and be involved and be an active participant in our own life. And in our active participation, it's not like we should just be negligent of all the impacts we have, but we should be present of them. We should be aware of them. And regardless of how aware we truly can be, I think we learn more by being present than any other, mental effort. Even with introspection, I feel like introspection is really just a present thing. It's us being present with our own internal monologue in a way, our own internal feelings, our own self. So we can actually find answers. So we can actually do things. But until we're present with that, we don't really find anything. I think we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. And a lot of times our whole entire self becomes unacknowledged. It's about recognizing that when you are watching yourself, you can also give yourself applause. It's not just a watching yourself in analysis. It could be a watching yourself in celebration, watching yourself in love, watching yourself in happiness for your ability to continue to be who you are and learning to accept that and learning to love that, because your love and acceptance is not in reference to anything but you truly. And when I said that, I really just mean that who we are is beyond comparison. Comparing ourselves to other people for our own happiness, comparing ourselves to other people for any feeling is really not worthwhile in my opinion, because it makes it about competition. It makes it about sometimes things that are outside of our control. And I don't mean that to say we can't compete with others. I love a good competition. I love a good sportsmanlike conduct. But I think it's when we base who we are off of our interactions, off of our competition, that we truly lose a lot of our ability to enjoy being, to enjoy the entire part of the journey. The journey's not always just up. It's not always just down either. But it's about finding yourself in the middle and you being the consistent part of your journey and recognizing that everything is always going to change in an external sense. We have to be the thing that remains in a way. And our remaining is a constant change. It's not us being the same person. It's not us holding on to our identity so fervently, but allowing ourselves to not be based on the ebbs and flows of the world, but learning to listen to the ebbs and flows of ourselves so we can actually navigate who we are within the world around us. All this to say thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you guys are taking care of yourself and doing what you can with what you have. A lot on the way, a lot already here. Book dropping October. I'm putting the date on it, or I'm putting a month on it, because I actually want to release it within that time. So keep being great. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, doing what you can, what you have.